Hello and welcome to this conversation on a pastoral response to pornography. I'm Father Kyle Schnippel. I'm pastor of two parishes in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati and recently have completed training through the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals, commonly known as ITAP, and their training certification for pastoral ministers, particularly to help with those struggling with sex addiction or experienced sex addiction, pornography addiction, among other things. Over the years in the training that I've received in my work as a chaplain for Courage, the training through ITAP, through Integrity Restored, realized that there's just a great need to address this problem, this exposure, the prevalence of pornography in our church, in our world, and how to respond to it in a prayerful way, how to help our families protect their young ones from accidental exposure, and then when an exposure happens, how to respond to that. A lot of the information that I've put together in this PowerPoint is from either ITAP, is gleaned from things online, or gleaned from studies and reading that I have done over the last 5, 6, 7 years. This is born out of a presentation that I do to parents of our second graders, which I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years here at my two parishes. As we begin, though, perhaps we can just say a prayer. Almighty and eternal God, who has created us in your image and bade us to seek after all that is good, true, and beautiful, especially in the divine person of your only begotten Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through the intercession of Saint Isidore, Bishop, Doctor, Patron of the Internet, and Blessed Carlo Acutis, during our journeys through the Internet, we will direct our hands and eyes only to that which is pleasing to you, and treat with charity and patience all those souls whom we encounter. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. And as we begin this presentation, just to look at some of the goals that we have for this presentation. First off, just to understand the scope and the reach of pornography today. It's much more global than I think we ever really anticipate or really expect. Also want to just touch on the addictive elements of problematic pornography use, those who can't stop pornography even though they want to. And then to recognize and signs of exposure among young people, how to address those signs of exposure, how to work with young people to help them find healing and grace after perhaps an exposure to pornography in their lives. One of the major pornography websites does a year in review every year. And so this graph on the right side of the slide is from their year in review. And it just helps to give an insight into how big a problem this really is. Every minute on this particular website, 80,000 visits, 77,000 searches, 11,000 hours of video content watched in a minute. Think of how many users are watching that. 2.8 hours of content is uploaded. And so you just get to sense it's almost on par with YouTube. And how pervasive, how much content is available on YouTube, there is almost as much content available in a pornography site. And this is just one side of many. Just one side of many. So think of that and how that multiplies across many other sites as well. Again, I mentioned this in the introduction, but why this talk? I think, to be proactive in helping parents with a modern day problem. In the class that I took through ITAP, one of the comments was made, to live in our world today is to experience a constant source of trauma. We have this constant trauma of exposure to inappropriate imagery, this constant trauma that we see with just aggression on social media sites, this constant trauma that exists in just our interactions with each other. And so with trauma opens us up into addictive things because we're seeking refuge. And so if that trauma is linked into pornography, then the addictive elements or the addictive possibility of pornography becomes so much greater. Just to look and recognize that the ongoing global pandemic at the time that I record this has accelerated the use of pornography, and to look just briefly to touch on how pornography has drastic and long-lasting effects impact on the brain, and in particular the developmental brain, the brain of our young people. And so we'll touch on that towards the end of that. There's a lot more that I could go into with that one that I'm just not going to be able to do in the scope of this presentation. But I want to look at the size and the reach of pornography. So this is information that I gleaned just in the last few weeks. Of the 15 most visited websites globally as of June 2019, 3 are specifically porn related. Number 8, 10, and 13. If you put them together, the total number of monthly visits is 9.66 billion monthly visits for those 3 sites together. That's more traffic than Instagram, Twitter, Amazon. Think how often you go to Amazon to get something. Wikipedia, Pinterest, WhatsApp, all those things. Only 4 websites globally outrank those top 3 porn websites together. Google, which dominates everything, of course. YouTube, which is still up there. Facebook. Baidu is the Chinese version of Google. And so you can see that it's no longer just in the deep, dark corners of the internet. It's becoming much, much, much more mainstream part of the internet. And so hence this presentation to just let us look at where it's all coming from and how massive of a program it really is. And the profits that the pornography industry generates are staggering. The global online porn market, and this is coming from The Guardian, I believe, the global online porn market is estimated to be $35.1 billion in 2019 and will grow by 15% over coming years. Think of the return on the investments that you have. 15% is unheard of. That growth is just enormous. So The Guardian, which is a major paper in the UK, estimates that in 2018, profits in the online porn market were between $9 billion and $97 billion. That's a big gap. So even rough estimates, 35 billion wouldn't be totally off of that. A rough estimate of 19 billion doesn't seem so in 2018 doesn't seem such a stretch. But then you compare that to other industries. Netflix has a profit margin of $11 billion. Hollywood is $11 billion. Hollywood as a whole, the whole thing. But the hidden secret in the porn industry is how masterful they are of an exploiter of digital technology. Because they recognize that that's their growth market. And so they're going to use and exploit anything they can in the digital realm to draw more customers and to draw customers deeper into the hole that they have. Now, I mentioned those 3 largest websites. I'm not going to say what they are for obvious reasons, but MindGeek is the overall parent company of those websites. And if you go on MindGeek's website, which I didn't do because I just don't trust it, but they say The Guardian was talking about they don't publish that that's what they do. And it's kind of a bland website. But MindGeek they're really good about farming information. Now, think about, we have a lot of frustration right now, and I'm recording this just prior to the election of 2020, how Facebook, Google, Twitter, how all those companies are using your information to sell you to advertisers. That's how they make money. Google makes money through clicks. Facebook makes money through those ad appearances on the side. So they're harvesting all your information to sell you to advertiser industries to make more money for themselves. That's how it's been done for ages on end. In the pornography industry, they flip it around. What they're trying to do is they're harvesting all the information that they can find about you. They're going to track and do all these digital trends, all these trends as far as what you're looking for, not you, but what their viewers are looking for. And they're constantly using that information to sell that viewer premium content. So they're trying to sell themselves to the visitor that's coming. And the way pornography works is it always takes more to satisfy. And so what they're going to do is they're going to monitor these sites, monitor what's available free and what's getting the highest likes and the highest spikes and the highest click rate through. And they're going to build premium videos based on that surveillance, based on that content, based on their analytics that they're doing to constantly get that user to go from a free video to a paid video to a paid video to a paid video. And so that's how they constantly drive. That's how they drive their profit margins and how they scheme through that, because they're going to constantly watch what's the most popular thing. And in their analytics page, their year in review page, they talk about what are the top searches based on all kinds of different criteria that they outline in that page. And the analytics continue. So they talk about what their top country is. It's by far and away the U.S., the United States, by far the largest consumer of pornography on this particular website. It's followed by the UK, India, Japan, Canada, France, Germany. Developed countries, which tells you something. Thought Sunday the most popular day. Friday is the least popular. Because Friday is the social day. Friday is the day where you go out with all your friends and you're doing those things. But what I wanted to highlight, in particular for parents, look at that band that's from 3 in the afternoon to 5 in the afternoon. That's where that little secondary spike is in the afternoon versus the big spike late at night. And thinking about who's home, who's around, who's unsupervised in that time frame. That tends to be a time frame that high school students access and view pornography. And I particularly say high school students, not high school boys, because boys and girls are both using pornography. And so that's a hidden time when they're home unsupervised, looking and being able to look at, that's when they, because you're not going to look at it when mom's going to be around. You're going to look at it into other things. And so we're going to come back to that and how to help prevent some of that later on in this presentation. And the thing that's really growing over the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years, pornography is not just for men. This particular slide, or this particular infograph, talks about the proportion in each country of visitors by females. So the United States down there towards the bottom, 30% of visitors from the U.S. And again, the U.S. is by far the largest consumer of pornography on this website. 30% of our visitors from this country are women. And statistics are showing strong growth among young female viewers. And again, this quote, the last bullet point, is from The Guardian as well. A report concluded that parents of 16 to 17-year-olds were either in denial or largely unaware of what their child viewed online, with the parents of teenage girls the most likely to be unaware their children were watching pornography. Yeah, the statistics say 1 in 3, almost half, teenage girls are watching pornography, and how it's really among teenage boys, college age boys, it's even higher. We'll get to that on the next slide, where that's impacting intimacy and healthy relationships, healthy dating relationships among young people these days, because for them, pornography has set the expectation of what dating should be about. And it's really skewing any sense that they have of a healthy sense of intimacy, a healthy sense of walking with each other in a romantic way. Because romance equals porn in the minds of our young people. Online porn statistics from the Recovery Village: 25% of search engine requests are related to sex. That's nothing new. 35% of downloads from the internet are pornographic. Again, not very new. That statistic, that percentage has remained fairly steady over the years. 40 million Americans say they regularly visit porn sites. It's a tenth of Americans. Over a tenth. 70% of men age 18 to 24 visit a porn site at least once a month. That's college students. And a lot of those habits are formed before they're in college. But the largest consumer group of online porn is men between the ages of 35 to 49. And how's that impacting their families, their spouse, their bride? A third of all internet porn users are women. Again, that's reflected from the last slide. Sunday, the most popular day of the week for viewing porn. Thanksgiving is the most popular day of the year for viewing porn. And if we were in person, I'd stop and say, why is that? Why do you think that that's the day that's most popular for viewing porn in our country? Because family life can be so dramatic and so tense, and porn is a unhealthy way of dealing with that stress. And there's just time alone. And those statistics are updated as of the 28th of March, 2019. They were I tried to find the most recent statistics that I could find in putting this presentation together for this year. Finally, pornography in kids. One of the things the pornography industry knows is that the earlier the exposure, the higher the rate of retention in the pornography industry, the higher the rate, the higher the experience of addiction is possible. And so the pornography industry is kind of scheming to push that average age of first exposure lower and lower and lower. And today it looks like it's between 8 and 11 years old. So second graders, second, third, fourth graders. And what happens is so often it's an accidental exposure. Kids are riding together on the bus and an older kid has something on his phone and he says, hey, look at this. And it's an inappropriate picture. And that young person, the younger student, sees it, doesn't understand it, but their body has a reaction to it and it causes them confusion, but in that confusion they want to see more. And that's how it starts to draw people in deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's no age verification on so many of these porn sites. Oh, there's an age verification. Are you 18 years of age or older? Of course, everyone's going to click yes. Every teenager is going to click yes. Of course I am. Because, and this goes together, a line that gets used so often. Frankly, kids don't even need to go looking for porn to find it. Kids don't need to go looking for it because porn is looking for your kids. Porn's constantly looking for them. To draw them into that, because then the earlier they get hooked, the more they're going to be a consumer for life. 2 studies, I was looking for more recent information. I can only imagine these percentages have gone up. 2008 study, 93% of boys, 62% of girls exposed to pornography during adolescence. And among university students in 2008, 50% of men, 10% of women viewed porn at least once a week. In the 12 years since those studies, that number's gone up. It certainly hasn't gone down. Where it's gone up to, I couldn't find more recent statistics, but it parallels with what was said in the last. 73% of men in college look at it monthly. Wow. How that's so damaging to their relationships, even to themselves. How that's so damaging. And that's the next slide. Why is it so damaging to kids? And this is from Net Sanity. This is something a little bit more anecdotal, but for a child, when you tell, especially a young child, when you tell them a story, their filter, their brain hasn't developed the ability to filter out what's real, what's make-believe. And so for them, the story is real. I heard a story of a dad at one point telling his young child, younger than 3, 4, 5-year-old, telling the story for the umpteenth time at bed, and finished the story, and little girl's like, read it again, Dad. And he got frustrated. He had read it 15 times in the last 3 days. Like, you know how the story ends. And she looks at him and goes, but I don't know how it'll end this time. Because for a young person, in a young person's brain, there is no distinction between reality and make-believe. That's why their imaginations are so vibrant. And so then when that imagination gets hijacked by pornography, it actually starts to rewire the circuitry of the child's brain. It rewires those pleasure sensors. dopamine, oxytocin, all those brain chemicals start to hijack and start to take over. And then the same thing that used to cause pleasure, used to cause just joy, used to cause just a happy time, no longer suffices in the same way that it did before. It also creates an environment of secrets because those young people know, I shouldn't have seen this. I don't want to talk about it. This culture of shame and embarrassment that drives it deeper, that feeds it as well. And as that child starts to grow and starts to look at more and more of this, it starts to create unrealistic expectations around sex. And hence the impact that it's having in just relationships in high school and in college. That unless you have sex with me, you don't really love me. And how that gets pushed from both sides of the coin, from males and females. It normalizes so much pornography. There is no sort of mainstream pornography anymore. So much of it is very aggressive in nature. And so it starts to normalize sexual harm. That if you really love me, you'd let me do this to you. And how that impacts the person watching it, how that impacts their view of their body. It promotes aggression towards women. Negative attitudes towards women. Women are just my toy for my gratification. It impacts healthy, intimate relationships. The studies that show that higher exposure rates to pornography has a higher incident rate of erectile dysfunction as well. Correlation does not equal causation, but those, they're almost in parallel. And so we see that higher rates of divorce, higher rates of marital infidelity, higher rates of so many other things that attack married life later on down the line. And of course, earlier and more graphic exposure certainly has a stronger and stronger link to addiction in our world today. Living in our culture is the constant experience of small traumas. And the more and more those traumas build up, the more and more likely we are to turn to anything that's going to soothe those traumas, whether that's pornography, alcohol, food, even athletics and working out and sports, all those things that can become addictive. And so many turn to pornography to help soothe those things. And all that came from the American Bar Association. So going back to Net Sanity and a few other places, what they're starting to see and what they're looking at is that there seems to be more and more pornography geared towards young people, geared towards kids, which is frightening, more and more frightening. And I love that line. Even if your kids are not looking for porn, porn is looking for your kids. And a great example of this, the youth minister at one of my parishes was searching to put together a PowerPoint for young people. And she was doing a thing about painting, and she did a Google search for paintbrush meme. As innocuous as that sounds, even that brought up pornography. You can search for the most innocuous things, and it brings up pornography. And think about how kids know how to scroll through pictures. And so maybe that first picture isn't pornographic, but as they scroll back and forth, they're going to hit on something. The teacher that I had in this class from ITAP talked about her 18-month-old granddaughter can scroll through pictures on a phone. And what happens if some of those pictures shouldn't be seen by an 18-month-old? How that's going to have an impact in that life, in that young life. And all of that together, early exposure, more and more graphic exposure, hiddenness, shame, embarrassment, self-soothing that comes with pornography, and often with masturbation, so often linked together, develops into a concept, problematic pornography use. And this is from Dr. Kevin Skinner, one of the leading advocates, one of the leading therapists for treating pornography addiction in the U.S. these days. And in his book, Treating Pornography Addiction, he says this: I've learned that treating pornography addiction is hard. I'm a professional who has seen grown men and women cry because they cannot stop looking at pornography. They tell themselves over and over that this will be the last time, only to give in a few hours, days, weeks, months later. After repeatedly giving in and breaking the barriers that they have erected to prevent a slip-up, they begin to feel hopeless. Often their own despair leads them into a relapse. Many are devastated because they promised their spouse, their religious leader, or their therapist that they were done. Devastated, not devoted, devastated. I should fix that typo. Dr. Patrick Carnes, quoted in the same source, Dr. Patrick Carnes was the one who really developed the concept of sex addiction as a real thing in our world today. And he states, he's quoted in the same source, "We have learned that addictive obsession can exist in whatever generates significant mood alteration, whether it be the self-nurturing of food, the excitement of gambling, the arousal of seduction. And one of the more destructive parts of sex addiction is that you literally carry your own source of supply." So think about the alcoholic. The alcoholic can just avoid anywhere that get rid of alcohol that's in the house. Just eliminate it all. It's not coming into the house. They can have a plan, game plan, and accountability. There's this very clear distinction of, am I drinking or not drinking? Am I gambling? Am I not gambling? Food's harder, self-nurturing of food, because we need food to survive. Pornography, sex, we don't need sex to survive. Priests have been doing it for 2 millennia now. Priests, nuns, religious. But yet the brain, once we get into this, the brain says, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. And without this, I can't survive. So Dr. Skinner talks about how a relapse plays out. In the reaction sequence, he outlines in the same book, Treating Pornography Addiction, how a relapse plays out. We see something, there's a stimulus, walking downtown during the summer and see someone who's not dressed appropriately, quote unquote. There's a stimulus that plants a seed. As soon as that seed is planted, all these emotions, the body starts to be flooded with chemicals. And the thoughts start to grow further and further. How that person that I saw gets melded into remembrances of pornographic scenes that I've watched in the past. And the chemicals just start to flood more and more and more. And then the body starts to crave it. And then the thought comes, well, I can do it this one last time. The lies that we tell ourselves. It's not hurting anyone. This hypothesis, these beliefs. Maybe as a Catholic, we're going to look at, when can I get to confession again? And then so many times I hear stories of just crazy activity that really shows the addictive part of this, running into a bathroom to pleasure oneself. Stories of repeated hookups with prostitutes, other things that happen. And how all that feeds more shame and guilt, and shame and guilt drives that cycle, drives that pattern further and further and further, deeper and deeper and deeper. And because of that, it becomes so hard to stop. You carry your own poison, like Dr. Carnes said. The brain, as MRI scans of someone looking at pornography and someone that uses pornography on a regular basis shows the same pleasure triggers firing as someone who uses hardcore drugs. And it's a self-feeding beast. Our memories, we can't get rid of. They come up in the most awkward and strangest times, which feeds shame and guilt in the person. And the guilt and shame feed the drive towards self-soothing behavior, because I know this is going to make me feel good, at least for a little bit of time. And then that crash that comes later of guilt that I told myself I wasn't going to do this just keeps feeding that cycle over and over and over and again. And so that's why it's so important to look at this now for young people. Because we know children will be exposed to pornography. We know your children will be exposed to pornography. We're going to do in parishes and schools and all the other things. We're going to do as much as we can to prevent that exposure, but we know it's going to happen. It's so prevalent these days. So whether it's intentional, whether it's accidental, whether it's at home, at school, on the bus, at sports, I still remember my first exposure when I was a kid. And I don't want to talk about it, but I still remember how that started to hijack what was going on in me. Your children, boys and girls, will be exposed. But the fact that they're exposed doesn't make you a bad parent. Doesn't make you. It's how we react and how we respond that makes us a good parent or a bad parent. And so that's the next few slides. What happens when your child comes to you or you notice something that's going on in your child, and what do we do first? And so from the first get-go, from day one, I think Joshua, end of the book of Joshua, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I set before you life and death, prosperity. Follow the ways of the Lord, and it's life. So just striving to put virtue, family values in place day by day, every day in your family life, as a way of just helping that open communication with from parents to children. All those things help. Following the 10 Commandments, following the precepts of the church, praying together, just having that time of openness to communication, putting things down and being interested in your kids' lives. Have clear rules for the internet, for computers, for devices. Number one, filters multiple layers of protection on each device, on each computer. And I was talking to someone yesterday, over the weekend. They said, parents put their filters on their kids' cell phones, teenagers, and the teenager looked at his mom and was like, I'm the only one that's going to have this on my phone, the only one in my friend group that's going to have this filter on my phone. And mom's response was, great, I know, and it's because I love you. And the kid may not think that, but if you've instilled those family values all along, when you say it's because I love you, it's at least going to say something powerful to them. Making sure computers are in public spaces, not in bedrooms. I think that's one of the greatest ways that pornography has reached our young people and has really infiltrated young people, is because their computers are in their bedrooms and they're spending more time on them than you realize. And the best defense against addiction is to just help your child grow to be a confident young adult and an adult. With their gifts and talents, with their weaknesses, just that ability to talk about their weaknesses, that failures don't define us, that failures help us become how we pick up after failures, help to define us better than the failure itself. So those internal resilience to shame is going to be the best protector against addiction in young people these days. And so just so I think not feeding shame among young people, and we'll come back to that in a couple slides as well. What are warning signs that your child has been exposed? And again, these are very easy to miss. There's drastic changes in behavior, especially towards the opposite sex or with their own sex organs. What do I mean by that? So there's more interest in pornography. There's more interest in masturbation. There's seclusion. So they're spending more time in their bedroom alone, especially if there's a device in their room. Or the bathroom, things like this. There's more jokes about sex that start to take place in the family. Can be one of the warning signs. Now, teenage boys especially are going to joke about that. But if if you see a drastic change in that, if you see any change in that, check their computers every now and again. Is their search history cleared? That's often a good sign. I think one thing too, as a parent, is to check your own history. What's been your story with pornography? And that may be a good story to talk about with your child when it's appropriate, when it's time to let them know that, hey, this might be something that you struggle with and how it's impacted you and how it's caused disruption in your life. And so in that, the best thing is being non-judgmental, to be listening, to keep calm, to explain as best you can that it's not what is and isn't appropriate. Now, I'll say that these are easy to miss. So one of the teachers that I had in a class that I took, she is a teacher and a therapist for addiction recovery, in particular around sex addiction. And she told the story about her own son started to get into drugs, and she never knew it. From late grade school, high school, and college, she didn't discover that he was addicted until he was out of college. And it started long ago. And she said the only thing that I could see, the only warning sign that I could see looking back was that instead of gathering at our house, they started gathering at someone else's house. Our house was always open to them, but they always chose to go somewhere else because they knew I was involved. And because of that, they started hiding. They were going somewhere else. That was the only sign that he had gotten into something that he shouldn't have gotten into. And she's like, here I am, the big guru in sex addiction and therapy and addiction counseling, and my own son fell into it. Yeah. So if it can happen to her, it can happen to any of us. What are some of the resources that can help in preventing exposure or just guiding things? Circle by Disney is great because Circle, you can set limits based on each person, each child that has a gadget. And you can set total screen time limits. When a friend comes over, when a fifth grader, your fifth grade son has a friend over and has a gadget and he asks for the Wi-Fi passcode, you can set him limits as well that share the same limits that your son has, or something like whatever that is. So that's a great one just for kind of managing content. Net Nanny is a great one as far as a filter software. And it's not going to let certain things through. Custodio is, think about Custodio, multiple layers of protection. So Custodio is, think about the water line coming into your house. Custodio is a filter on the line versus a filter at the faucet. Custodio is a filter on the main line coming into your house, so it's going to try and stop things there versus stop things at the gadget level, because you can get things around things on gadgets as well. Covenant Eyes used to be the big one, and they've kind of moved off to the side. They're not as recommended anymore, and I don't remember why. Mobic IP, mobile, you can see in there, it's particularly designed for mobile applications. Norton is an antivirus, and so they have filtering software as well. K9 Web Protection so Custodio, Norton, K9 are all get clamped on that water pipe coming into your house and are filtering there. And so I'd encourage you to just kind of look up those resources when you get a chance. And finally, perhaps the most drastic thing. My kids saw something. What do I do now? This is from Happy Families, which is based in Australia. I think the first thing, stay calm. Yelling and overreacting, slamming doors, that's just going to create shame. And that's the last thing you want to do, because shame's a driver for this. So you stay calm, just listen. What did you see? How'd you stumble across it? You're not in trouble. I think the most important thing, you're not in trouble. Anytime you see something that causes you to be confused, I want you to come to me. And I won't yell at you. You won't be in trouble. I just want to listen. Listen to how it went. And then take some time. If you need to, if like your heart rate spikes because of this, take a break. Take 5 minutes, plan your talk, plan out what are you going to say. And get them talking. I think the more that they talk, the better. Talk about the real, about sex, the real purpose of sex here. The theology of the body is a great thing to talk about and to study and to understand, and to problem solve together. So, okay, where to have this conversation is often a key thing. It's young people, when they're looking at you face to face, it's going to be a bit more of a challenge. So I so often hear parents talk about the conversations that they have in cars while they're driving their kids to that softball tournament, or a soccer tournament or a soccer game across town. Hey, can you talk about what have you seen lately on the internet? Have you seen anything inappropriate? Oh, Mom, come on. No, really. It's okay. You're not in trouble. And then if there are relapses, if there are other things, if there are, that problem solved together, it's like it's not a one-time conversation, it's an ongoing conversation. Hey, did you see anything lately? It's fine. How do you see it? What can we do to kind of prevent you from seeing it again? What can we do together to help you prevent you from seeing it again? And this is why, because I love you and I don't want you to end up trapped by this thing, whatever it is. You know your kids better than I do, obviously. What's going to be the best way for them to hear it? Mistakes that often happen, and that's mistakes that are going to drive this deeper. Use shame as a deterrent. How could you? You're an embarrassment to our family. That's just going to drive it deeper. Or you're going to ignore the problem because maybe it's hitting a little too close to home, and I don't want to face the fact that I struggle with this. So I'm just going to ignore it because it's easier to just ignore it. The ostrich with the head in the sand. And then the kid is navigating these things, knows it's wrong, but wants to kind of keep looking at it and doesn't have the tools or the resources personally to know how to respond to those things. And instead of guiding your young person in using technology healthily, taking it all away, it's going to feed that desire for it. Don't make assumptions. This is a great story. So a couple weeks ago, I run a group for Courage, and one of the guys in the Courage group, Courage is a support network for those who experience same-sex attraction. And one of the guys asked a question or had a comment about something, and I started answering what I thought he had asked about or commented on. And it bounced around the room for about 10, 15 minutes before one of the other guys is like, stop, hold on. What were you actually asking about? And I realized that when he responded to that, I was like, oops, I'm sorry. And I apologize. I'm like, I made an assumption there, and I was answering a question you didn't ask, and I'm sorry for that. Don't blame yourself. Don't have a one and done conversation. It's an ongoing conversation to have that. So assumptions can be really, what you do when you assume. So just having that open conversation, taking a deep breath when we need to take a deep breath as a parent, or you need to as a parent, and moving forward from there. And just a couple things in closing. It's a scary world, and it's getting more and more frightening. It really is. I hear stories and I hear confessions, and it's just like, woof. I'm glad I'm not. I have 5 siblings who are all raising kids. One of my sisters is a grandmother by now, and I pray for my nieces and nephews, my great nieces, because I often joke I got the easy end of this deal because I don't have to raise kids in this environment. I think by listening to this talk, just reassure yourself you're a great parent and you desire to do the best for your kids. And that's what's really driving it. And to do what's best for your kids means to be involved in their life. And it's going to be a constant and uphill battle. Think about those things, how pervasive the pornography industry is, how they're using technology to really farm information to your young people. So it's going to be an uphill battle, and it's not a one-time thing. But the important thing is you're not alone in this. In the church, we want to help so many other ways. Want to connect you with others to help combat this battle. And it really is a battle, as a spiritual battle. And I think the most important thing, if you take anything away from this, love your kids. Love your kids when they succeed. Love your kids when they screw up. Love them when they're just being kids and they're being goofy. Because that's what they need in our world today. Please know my prayers for you, and I'm praying for every parent and family that watches this, and just striving to overcome the battle to free your children, to keep your children free from pornography, to keep your children free from that addiction that's there, to know that there's hope in Jesus Christ. He's the conqueror of sin and death. I think of Romans 8. What can separate us from the love of God? even in the battle of addiction, in the struggle against these things, even these things cannot separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being attentive. And please know my prayers. God bless.